Thanks for joining us. I'm Diane Rehm. Juan Williams has covered some controversial stories over the years as a senior news analyst for NPR and a commentator for Fox News. But now he himself has become the controversy after expressing a personal opinion on the O'Reilly factor. Juan was promptly fired by NPR. Former senior news analyst Juan Williams joins me to talk about his roles at Fox and NPR, and we will take your calls. 800-433-8850. Send us your email to drshow at wamu.org. Feel free to join us on Facebook or Twitter. And let me say right up front, Juan, you have been a good friend of mine for many years. So it's good to see you this morning.
Diane, you've been a friend to me, so thanks for inviting me on the show in this moment of turmoil.
And let me just point out that we've just learned the NPR Ombudsman has received 22,000 emails about Juan Williams as of yesterday. Apparently that does not include messages to individual shows or to NPR's general comment box. My first question to you, Juan, describe for me how you have seen the two roles, one as NPR News analyst and the other as Fox News commentator. How are they different? How are they similar?
Diane, I'm the same person in both venues, but I'm someone who's aware of the difference in the venues. One is cable television, one is radio. On the Fox News channel, I realize that it is designed in terms of the new landscape of American media, which is to say it's niche journalism. They have an express conservative bent to the way that they program, especially in prime time. During the news portion of the day, their reporters are first class, and I think you can say, I can listen and learn on an impartial basis. But once you get into the prime time schedule, people like Bill O'Reilly, Sean Hannity, I think then it's very clear that there is a conservative orientation to the presentation of news, subjects presented, opinions offered, and the rest. When I'm on National Public Radio, I'm not involved in the kind of high-volume, high-energy debate and give and take and jabs that go with that kind of expression of opinion. Usually I'm in conversation with one person, oftentimes someone like Scott Simon or Steve Inskeep, Renee Montagne, and they are asking me specific questions that allow me to take advantage of the fact that I've been in Washington for 30-plus years, that I've been the White House correspondent for the Washington Post, that I've been a columnist here, on, and I have lots of contacts, lots of sources. So people tend to answer my phone calls. I think people have been very comfortable with me as a journalist, that I'm trustworthy. And so in that job, I am really taking advantage of the fact of the connections, the experience, and the reporting background to help listeners better understand the news. And so oftentimes it's a one-on-one conversation with someone like Scott Simon, and he's saying, now help me understand what are the roots of this problem, where did this come from, where is it likely to go, so the listener has a better sense of what's taking place with the news. That's the job of a news analyst for National Public Radio. Whereas, and again, it's the same information that I'm delivering in one venue or another because I'm the same person, but it's delivered in a different form. And if you're in the midst of a debate and someone like Bill O'Reilly is firing off at you, you have to fire back, and it's going to be quite intense. You're going to be interrupted at times. That's not the way that news is presented on National Public Radio.
But it's not just the presentation, is it? It's also the content.
Well, not for me. In other words, you might be in a situation on both stations, where someone has decided this is the story they want to cover, they want to talk about, and they may pick different stories. But the content, from my point of view, you asked about the difference between the commentator role and the analyst role, is all based on what I am able to report and know and research.
But what about the expression of personal views?
This is an interesting point. When I was fired last Wednesday, the woman who called me said, would you have said the same thing on National Public Radio? And I said, of course. And she was saying that this had somehow violated NPR ethics, journalistic ethics. And I said, it would violate my journalistic ethics if I didn't tell people the truth. If someone asked me a question or tried to help me understand the situation, and I said, I won't tell you the truth about how I feel, I think that's a violation of journalistic ethics.
All right. I want our listeners to hear the entire exchange between you and Bill O'Reilly. Here it is.
Political correctness can lead to some kind of paralysis where you don't address reality. I mean, look, Bill, I'm not a bigot. You know the kind of books I've written about the civil rights movement in this country. But when I get on a plane, I got to tell you, if I see people who are in Muslim garb, and I think, you know, they're identifying themselves first and foremost as Muslims, I get worried. I get nervous. Now, I remember also that when that Times Square bomber was at court, I think this was just last week, he said the war with Muslims, America's war with is just beginning, first drop of blood. I don't think there's any way to get away from these facts, but I think there are people who want to somehow remind us all, as President Bush did after 9/11, it's not a war against Islam. President Bush went to a mosque to worship.
Well, there isn't any theology involved in this at all from my perspective, Juan, but you live in the liberal precincts. Yeah, you actually work for NPR. Okay.
Yes.
And it's not about it's about politics, as I said. But my analysis is that this Israel thing, and that liberals feel that the United States is somehow guilty in the world of exploitation and backing the wrong side, and it makes it easier for them to come up with this kind of crazy stuff that, well, you can't really say the Muslims attacked us on 9/11.
No, but what Barbara Walters said to you...
Norwegians? I mean, come on.
No, but wait a second. No, wait, hold on. Because if you said, Timothy McVeigh, the Atlanta bomber, these people who are protesting against homosexuality at military funerals, very obnoxious, you don't say first and foremost, we got a problem with Christians. That'd be crazy.
But it's not at that level. It doesn't rise near to that level.
And when you said in the Talking Points memo a moment ago that there are good Muslims, I think that's a point. You know,
but everybody knows that, Juan.
No,
I mean, what are we in third grade here, or what?
No, you don't. But you've got to be careful. This is what Barbara Walters was saying.
I got to be careful. You just said it. I got to be careful. I have to qualify everything 50 times. You know what, Juan? I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not doing it anymore.
But I will say, I will say Muslim terrorists, responsibility.
But I'm not going to say, oh, it's only a few. It's only a tiny bit. It's not, Juan. It's whole nations. Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, whole nations.
And, of course, that was Juan Williams in his much-talked-about exchange with Fox News' Bill O'Reilly. Do you have any regrets about what you said that evening?
None. And, you know, for me, Diane, I oftentimes think, you know, you're in the shower the next day and you think, oh, I should have put it this way, or I wish I'd thought of that. But I expressed exactly and truly and sincerely how I feel if I'm at the airport. And I was setting up a conversation in the rest of that segment. I go on to make the point that you cannot, Bill O'Reilly, say things that would lead people to make a bigoted conclusion and then take actions like cutting the neck of a cab driver in New York, which happened recently, or to say that Muslims don't have a right to build a mosque near Ground Zero, or that it's okay for this pastor in Florida to think about burning the Quran. So that was the entirety of the conversation. As you just heard it, Diane, and again, I understand that I'm in the midst of a personal storm and I don't have much perspective, but from my perspective, listening to that, I thought I was reining in O'Reilly. I was saying I think that we have, as Americans, to be careful, even as we might have fears, not to exercise any bigotry or violation of constitutional rights of any group, but specifically Muslims.
And here's something you said back in 1986 when you participated in a forum at the New Republic about a jewelry store who had excluded admitting black men on the grounds that they were likely to commit robbery. You said, quote, common sense becomes racism when skin color becomes a formula for figuring out who is a danger to me. Now, can the same thing be applied to Muslim garb?
Yes, But you have to separate what is a feeling. In other words, I think, it's people say to me, and I think the NPR ombudsman wrote this, what would I have said if someone had described a tall, big black guy with an afro and a dashiki as standing by the airplane door? Would I have said the same thing? And of course, I have two levels of thoughts about this. First and foremost, there's no history or record of black people getting in airplanes and taking them into buildings and committing that act of terrorism. So I don't know exactly what she's talking about. But the second thing to say is that if she's suggesting that people have fears, let's say if you're walking down the street and suddenly you turn and you notice that there's a group of young black men dressed thuggishly, I would say yes. Not only might she have some anxiety, I would have some anxiety. And famously, Jesse Jackson had some anxiety when he said that that's his feeling on the streets in Chicago. And he said he regretted having to admit that, but that's the truth. And I think it's the truth for lots of people. If I was being, it's not just black people. If I'm walking down the street in small town America and think that there's a group of young white kids, or walking down the street and there's some skinheads who I think are paying attention, I'm like, what is going on? So that's just a matter of being aware of your environment. Now, I think the important point here, Diane, is that I didn't suggest that on the basis of my instinctual fear of people in Muslim garb that they should not be allowed on the plane. We should discriminate against them. They should be subject to extra security. I simply admitted to my feeling.
Juan Williams.